The kale in our garden is just going crazy right now, and we've got more than we could possibly eat fresh. So I decided to get out and harvest some and get my dehydrator running and make some homemade kale chips. So this is one of our favorite ways to preserve kale. Actually, to be fair, we don't preserve a whole ton of our kale this way because the chips do not last long on the countertop. They usually get eaten within a day or two. In fact, I think that we like kale chips more than we like fresh kale. So this recipe for cheesy kale chips has fast become one of our family's favorite homemade snack recipes, and I'm so excited to share it with you, and I hope your family loves it as much as we do. Hey guys, so today I'm going to be showing you how I make one of my favorite homemade snacks straight from the garden. Yeah, I'm talking about kale chips. And so I don't know about you, but we have got more kale coming on in our garden right now than we could possibly eat fresh. And our favorite way to preserve kale is to make our own homemade kale chips in our dehydrator. So today we're going to be making what I call cheesy kale chips. And the reason I put that in quotations is because there's no actual cheese in this recipe. In fact, it's actually completely vegan friendly if you are vegan or you've got anybody in your family who's vegan. But what we're using to kind of mimic that cheese flavor is, first of all, we've got some raw cashews that have been soaking in water, because we're going to use that to kind of make almost like a creamy sauce, almost like the texture of like a nacho cheese sauce, right? And then we've got something called nutritional yeast. Now, nutritional yeast is simply a deactivated yeast, so it doesn't rise or anything like that. And it's actually grown on top of molasses, funnily enough, but it gives a cheesy kind of flavor to whatever you're using it on. So the combination of the kind of the cashews and the nutritional yeast, along with a few other ingredients, which we'll go over, when blended all together, kind of almost mimics like a nacho cheese sauce. And then of course you spread that on your kale chips and dehydrate it. And then I find that it gives a really, really nice, not just a nice flavor, but a nice crunch and a good kind of substantial chip in the end. If you've ever bought cheesy kale chips from a health food store or the grocery store, they're very similar in taste and texture to those. So, and of course, if you have ever bought them from the grocery store, you know how expensive they are. So learning to make your own at home will save you tons of money as well. So I'm going to be showing you how we make our kale chips in our dehydrator, but I'm also going to be split testing a batch in our oven, just because I understand that not everybody has a dehydrator yet, or is maybe in the market for one quite yet. So I have not made this particular recipe in the oven before, so this will be new for me too. We're going to kind of test it out and see how it goes. But typically we would make ours in our dehydrator. Now, we have an Excalibur dehydrator, the 9 tray, and that is absolutely what I recommend. It is top of the line. It comes with all sorts of functionality that you might not get on some of the lower price models. So it has a built-in timer and different temperature settings and all that. I love the timer because honestly, I like to get my stuff in the dehydrator, and then usually you're waiting for a few hours anyway. So if I need to go do something, or oftentimes I'll even put it in before I go to bed, and then I don't have to worry about it. I can just set the timer, and then when I wake up or come back, then my food's sitting there dehydrated waiting for me. Don't have to worry about over drying it or anything like that. So if you're in the market for a dehydrator and you're, on the edge, not sure which one to get, I would highly recommend the Excaliburs. And so I'm a big believer in investing a little bit more upfront for a quality product that's going to last you for a long time. The Excalibur is definitely it. So of course I will include a link to the full blog post with the printable recipe for these kale chips below the video here, and within that blog post I'll include links to any of the products and things that I use in this tutorial as well if you want to check them out. Okay, so let's get started. Now, first of all, what you're gonna wanna do, obviously make sure that you gather all your ingredients and gather your kale and everything, but before you do anything else, you're gonna want to get your cashews soaking in some water. So I like to soak mine for at least an hour. So you want to start with a cup of raw cashews, and then I just cover that right in the measuring cup, as you can see, with some water, and I just let them soak. These ones have actually been soaking for a couple hours now, just while I've kind of prepared everything else. But you want to try to soak them for at least an hour, just to, you know, get some of that moisture back into them, because we're going to be blending them up into a sauce. So once you've got that, you know, pretty much prepared, then of course you're going to want to get your kale ready. So you're going to start with a large bunch of kale. Now I know that's not very specific, right? But kind of just, you know, I would say that this is pretty close to a large bunch right here. On average, about 8 to 10 stems of kale is probably good for one batch. So start with your large bunch of kale, and then you're going to want to, of course, wash it, check it for any little bugs or anything like that. Wash it and remove it from the stems, and then break it up into kind of small chip-sized, bite-sized pieces. So I've gone ahead and done this with one batch here already. And what I find just the easiest way to do this, if you have a salad spinner, which I do and I love, because you want to get these the kale as dry as possible after, so that the cheesy sauce will stick to them. So I go ahead and I tear mine all up off of the stem first and rip it into pieces, and then I throw it in that salad spinner, give it a good thorough wash, and then I spin that baby until that kale is really dry. And then just to make sure, I've actually laid it out on a paper towel here to just absorb any other moisture, and I've kind of patted it dry. And this, there's pretty much no moisture left on this. So just make sure that you got it, like I say, in kind of bite-sized pieces. It will shrink a little bit in the dehydrator, so you don't want to go too small on them, but like that's a good size right there to make a kale chip. All right, so once you've got your kale prepared, then if you're using the oven, then you're gonna wanna preheat it. So I'm gonna go ahead and preheat my oven to 200 degrees. Oops. Okay, and then while that's happening, of course, if you have a dehydrator, you don't have to worry about that, another bonus. But now I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to blend up my sauce. Okay, so I'm gonna take these cashews that have been soaking, and I'm just gonna pour out the excess water, but don't worry too much about getting them like completely dry, or getting all the water out, because that's okay to have a little bit extra water when you blend it up, just to make that sauce a little bit more liquid. You may even end up having to add a little bit more water in the end anyway, if it's too thick. So, but I'm gonna start by draining the majority of the water out. Okay, so I've got my cashews now, my soaked cashews. And then you can use whatever blender you have, but I really love, this is a Breville blender. It's got a few different attachments. Again, I will link to this in the blog post. I use this a lot for anything that's like a bit of a thicker sauce. So I use it obviously to blend up my sauce for kale chips. I use it to blend up nut butters and things that I make at home. There's the immersion blender attachment comes with it, and I use that to make my own homemade mayo. I use it to blend up fruit to make fruit leather in the dehydrator, and also to put into our kombucha to flavor it. So this baby gets a lot of use. So I will link to it as well in the blog post, because it's one of my absolute favorite, most used kitchen tools. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start adding my ingredients in. So you're gonna start with your 1 cup of soaked raw cashews. Oops. And then I've got half a cup of nutritional yeast. I've got a couple large cloves of fresh garlic. Then I'm also going to add in 2 tablespoons of avocado oil. Now you could also use olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, but I just really like the avocado oil because I find that it's got a really neutral taste, where I find that the olive oil is a little bit more of a distinct flavor profile. So I like to use the really neutral oil for this, just so that I don't kind of interfere with any of the other flavors that are going on. So 2 tablespoons of avocado oil. And then I also need 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. And so just so you know, the recipe that I'm using right now, I've kind of mishmashed a whole bunch of different recipes that I found in various places to find one that works for me and works with the ingredients that I tend to have on hand. And this is the one that I've tested and that I've really enjoyed. So I'm gonna add 1, 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. And you can use fresh lemon juice as well if you have fresh lemons on hand. Okay, and then I'm also gonna add in, I've already prepared this all here, but I've got a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, sea salt, and then I've got a 1/2 teaspoon of onion powder and a 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder, just to kind of give it a little extra flavoring. Now the extra garlic and onion powder is totally optional, but I really like it. I love a ton of flavor in everything that I eat, so. Okay. Lid on there. And then I'm just gonna go ahead, get this all plugged in and blend this up. Oops. Plug is obviously bent, doesn't fit in the socket anymore. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna pop that on. And I've got it set on the highest setting right now, which is what I usually do, up to 15. And I'm gonna go ahead and blend. So you're gonna blend. See, already I can tell I'm gonna have to add a little bit more water because it's kind of sticky and it's not moving around too much. But you don't want it to be too liquid, right? So you're best to just add a little, like a tablespoon of water at a time, just to the point where it blends and starts to liquefy a bit. So I'm gonna probably add just a couple tablespoons of water into this cup and throw it in. So I'm gonna pour a little bit of this in to start. Let's see how that goes. Oops. And you may need to just scrape the sides down a bit as well, just so that it's all hitting the blade. Okay. There we go. So you're just gonna wanna go ahead and blend until it's basically all evenly blended and kind of, it can still be kind of mealy, right? It doesn't have to be perfectly smooth or anything like that, but you want it to be thick, but spreadable still, right? So you want it to be, I'm gonna probably actually add the rest of this liquid just to make sure. So I've added now an extra 2 tablespoons of water. Probably wouldn't do any more than that, but I want it to be able to spread all over these kale, There we go. Looking good. Okay, that looks great. Hopefully you can see that there. It's nice and kind of creamy, but still thick. Okay, so I'm just gonna put this off to the side. Okay, so I'm just gonna throw all my kale in the bowl. As you're doing this, kind of just double check that everything's the right size. And I tend to discard, this one's got some little buggy holes and stuff in it. I tend to discard anything like that. I've also got rabbits who really enjoy any extra kale that we have left over. And of course, it's great for the compost as well. But of course, we want to eat and preserve as much of it as possible for ourselves and our family. So, in come the kale chips. All right, so I've got it all in a bowl now. Go ahead and take that blender blade out and get all of this cheesy kale or cashew nutritional yeast sauce into the bowl. Make sure they're clean, of course, right? You've already done that. But you're gonna really get in there and you're just gonna mix them around and you're gonna just make sure that you try to coat all of the kale. wash my hands, and then I'm gonna get my dehydrator trays out. Okay, so I've got, this is one of my dehydrator trays, and then I'm gonna prep my tray for the oven as well. So I'm gonna put some parchment paper on this just so that the sauce and stuff doesn't stick to the baking sheet. Parchment on there, and then I'm gonna start with my first dehydrator tray there. So again, just make sure that as you pull it out, this is where you want to be a little bit more finicky and kind of try to do them almost one at a time. Lay them out in a single layer so that they dehydrate nice and evenly. Okay, so I've got my tray ready for the oven. And then I'm going to go ahead and start on my dehydrator tray. So this is the other nice thing about using the dehydrator is, of course, I've got a 9-tray dehydrator. So if you end up with a similar dehydrator to mine, then you can do a whole big batch of whatever you're dehydrating at once, rather than just a baking sheet or maybe 2 in your oven. Obviously, I'm going to have to do a few more trays, but I'm going to go ahead and get these trays off to the side. So I'm going to just pop this in the dehydrator, which I'll show you in a minute. And cheesy hands, still I'm going to go ahead and pop this in the oven, get this started. I'm going to go ahead and set the timer for 45 minutes. Although it may take up to an hour, but I'm going to check it at 45 minutes. So again, we've got the temperature set to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Set it for 45 minutes, but it may need up to an hour if they're not crispy yet. So I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of my dehydrator trays filled and get it going and show you how the dehydrator works. Okay, so I've got all of my trays of cheesy kale prepped for the dehydrator. I ended up getting 3 full trays. And of course, I've got 1 tray in the oven, so if you're just using your dehydrator, you'd probably get about 4 trays full out of 1 large bunch of kale. So of course, if you've got an Excalibur 9 tray that can do more, then you can do a double batch and save yourself a little bit of time as well. But because we've only got 1 batch and I've only got 3 trays in, I actually like to remove some of the other trays just to give it a little bit more airspace and make sure that that kale's not touching. I had put one of these trays in the very top and it was kind of smushing against the very top, so I like to leave a little bit of space if I can anyway. So I'm going to go ahead, pop those trays in, and then, am I plugged in? I am. I'm going to go ahead and set the set the temperature to 135 degrees Fahrenheit, and then I'm going to set the timer to 6 hours. So I've set it to 135, and then the timer is set for 6 hours, and then basically now we just play the waiting game. All right, so the oven has just gone off. The timer I had set for 45 minutes, and that's just gone off now. So I'm gonna go ahead and check these kale chips. And of course, I have been checking them a few times intermittently just because they're in the oven. We don't want them to overcook or anything like that, but they've been looking pretty good. So I'm gonna check them out at 45 minutes and just see if they have crisped up enough. Then that is probably enough time, but otherwise we might have to bump it up to an hour. Now those look really good. And they're getting pretty crispy, but they are they could probably use an extra 15 minutes. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna throw these back in the oven for another 15. Okay. So I put the kale chips back in for another 15 minutes. So we have had them dehydrating in the oven at 200 degrees Fahrenheit for an hour now, and we're going to check them out. Cool. Awesome. So they look pretty good. You can see that. And they feel pretty crispy. So I think that this test actually worked out pretty well. So an hour at 200 degrees Fahrenheit for these cheesy kale chips. So if you do not have a dehydrator, then test is successful. I'm going to go ahead and try one. Yeah. can absolutely do these ones in the oven. So there you go. Okay, so I have now finished our batch of the kale chips that were in the dehydrator. So I had originally set the temperature was 135, and I set the timer to 6 hours, which is what I've set it at before. But I did kind of check it a few times throughout, and I found that actually by the 5-hour mark that they were all completely dried, so I did turn off the dehydrator then. And they are all ready. So in the end, and I've got my 3 trays here, in the end, I was able to kind of compare the two. So this is one of the trays that's come out of the dehydrator, and this is the tray that has come out of the oven, and they're really very similar actually. So if you do not have a dehydrator, you can absolutely make these in the oven. They're delicious. I actually had to like stop myself from eating the entire tray. But if you have a dehydrator, the plus is that you can make a larger batch all at once. If you are using the oven, the plus to that is that you can do the batch in an hour or less. So, you know, just depends on how you want to go about it. But the dehydrator is great because you can do a really large batch. You can even do a double batch if you've got the 9 tray and get it all done at once. And then, like I say, the oven, if you want to do a really quick batch and get them done in an hour, I found that this was a really, really great way. At 200 degrees Fahrenheit, you can get a batch of kale chips done in an hour or less, like I say. So either or, I'm going to include the recipe and the dehydrating instructions for both the dehydrator and the oven in the full blog post. So make sure to click the link below the video, and that'll take you to the full blog post, and there will be a printable recipe included in that. And like I say, I will link to any of the products, the dehydrator that I use, as well as the Breville, the hand mixer that I use to make the sauce, and anything else in there. And of course, if you like this video, make sure to hit like and subscribe, and leave a comment below and let me know how your batch of kale chips turns out at home.